I come to sing a song about hope I go. I came out here to sing a song, so here I go. I guess I think that if I tinker long enough, one might appear. And look, it's here. One verse is done. The work's begun. I come to sing a song about hope, in spite of everything ridiculous and sad. Though I'm beyond belief depressed, confused and mad. Well, I got dressed. I underestimated how much that would take. I didn't break until right now. I sing of hope and don't know how. Well, maybe I can substitute strength because I'm strong. I'm strong enough. I got through lots of things I didn't think I could. And so did you. I know that's true. And so we sing a song about hope. Though I can't guarantee there's nothing much behind it. I've got to try to teach my children I can find it. And so today, while life is crazy and impossible to bear, it must be there. Fear never wins. That's what I hope. See, I said hope. The work begins.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Jean Namitz, and I'm the Director of Religious Education at the Unitarian Society of Ridgewood and part of the team that brings services to life each Sunday. For over a century, the Unitarian Society of Ridgewood has been gathering in community as a home for liberal faith and free thinking. Ours is a faith based on shared promises. We do not demand any particular beliefs about God and the cosmos, but we do believe in the interdependent unity of all existence. And we do believe that healing love is accessible to us all. Here in this community, we celebrate each person, whatever their gender, sexual orientation, age, education, history, race, ethnicity, economic status, physical or mental health, or theology. If this is your first time visiting one of our Sunday services, we are so glad you found us this morning and welcome. Please consider staying for our virtual coffee hour. It's a great way to connect with small groups of folks. And if you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out the Google form that will be dropped into the chat or email our office at 113cottage@gmail.com or visit our website, uuridgewood.org. And again, welcome.
I will add my welcome to Jeannie's and just share 3 quick announcements. Next Sunday, November 22nd, we are having a joint Thanksgiving service with our neighbor UU congregation, CUC in Paramus. It's going to be lovely and exciting. Here's the important thing to remember. We usually meet at 10 a.m. and they usually meet at 10:30. So we are compromising and we're going to meet at 10:15 next Sunday. If you're early, don't worry, and we'll send lots of reminders, but please plan to be at this wonderful and exciting event. Then the following Tuesday, November 24th, the annual Ridgewood Ministerial Association's Interfaith Thanksgiving Worship Service will take place online at 7:30. Again, we're going to share details of that in coming e-blasts. If you've never participated, it really is a wonderful experience, so please plan to attend that one as well. And then finally, earlier this week, you saw an email tease about a huge and awesome raffle that we are doing as a fundraiser at USR this year. This coming week, we'll bring more emails with more details about how to participate in that. It's going to be very cool. Please look for those emails and really read them carefully. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Hello, I'm Jackie.
I'm Elijah. And I'm Julia.
We light this chalice for the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the energy of action as we gather together in the circle of community. Bye.
Bye.
Now, come, listen, take a deep breath. There is an ancient philosophy that regards the movement of the planetary spheres as music. Be as still as you can and listen. Can you feel the music? Can you hear the music? With each breath, each rise and fall, each turn of the earth, each ending and beginning of the day, can you hear the music of life? Breathe and listen.
When I was young, I read all the time, anything I could get my hands on. And over the years, some of those quotes from some of those books have stuck with me. Some short, insignificant, or seemingly so. And sometimes I remember what they come from, and other times I have no idea. And they'll pop into my head at random moments. But I've realized that so often the ones that have stuck are ones that evoke a sense of timelessness, that remind me both of our human smallness and our human power. And as I was thinking about today's service, a quote kept coming back, one I can identify. It comes from Norman Maclean's work, A River Runs Through It. The book tells the story of brothers and a family that struggles to communicate clearly with each other. And it ends with this passage. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. It is a passage that in 20 plus years I have never shaken. And I think it's because in it, I hear a call to listen beneath the noise, to listen for the truths, the truth that lives beyond our daily comprehension. In the poetry of those words, I hear an invitation to listen for the music of the spheres, echoing in the passage of time, echoing in the cycles of life, echoing in each of us. This morning, we listen for the echoes as we vision for the future.
Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord. Oh, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. If you get there before I do, oh yes, Lord, tell all my friends I'm coming too. Oh yes, Lord. Oh, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah.
Welcome to the 5th week of our journey through New Jersey, highlighting places and people associated with the Underground Railroad. This initiative is part of our own journey towards reckoning with history and racial justice and our recognition of the people and places here in New Jersey that played a role for freedom seekers. Today's Underground Railroad story weaves together a history, a place, a doctor, and brothers in the quest for freedom and dignity. Let's start with a place. Colemantown's place in African American history dates back to the 1800s. A small, rural community of African American residents, it was named for William Coleman, who served as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Its historic sites include Jacob's Chapel, the Colemantown Meeting House, and the Colemantown Cemetery. This trio of properties date back to the 1800s and are a testament to the contribution of African Americans residing there. The meeting house served as a safe harbor for men and women of color to worship and learn. It is one of the few black schoolhouses still standing in the state. The church stands nearby, as does the cemetery. This is the burial ground of African American Civil War soldiers and of Dr. James Still, known as the Black Doctor of the Pines. This is the place where free black people assisted the runaway enslaved at great personal risk, and where our story continues. A doctor, one of 18 children of former enslaved parents, he rose from a rustic poor childhood in the Pine Barrens to become one of the largest landowners and wealthiest men in Burlington County. Growing up, his family hid a terrible secret. Before James's birth, his father had purchased his own freedom, but his mother had escaped from bondage and, if caught, could be returned to her owner. Furthermore, all her children would automatically be considered the property of the slave owner. It's small wonder that the family lived remotely deep in the Pine Barrens. But a childhood incident made a deep impression on James. A doctor came through the area to inoculate the children, and from that moment on, James wanted to become a doctor. But how? Without money, education, or white skin, his childhood dream seemed unattainable. Desperately poor, James' father sent him away to be an indentured servant for 3 years with the proviso that in each year of his servitude, he would be allowed to go to school for 1 month. Altogether, James received 3 months of formal education. He had previously taught himself to read, and during his servitude and the years following, James read all he could on botany and physiology. These readings, coupled with his knowledge of plants and herbs acquired from his youth and contacts with Native American healers, reinvigorated his thirst to be a healer himself. Starting with a small still, James began concocting herbal remedies for neighbors and friends. as his success and popularity grew, the demand for his remedies increased. Derided by medical doctors in the area, a plot was afoot to discredit James since he had no formal training or medical degree. Undeterred, James sought legal advice and was told that indeed he could not charge for his services or hold himself out as an MD without a degree, but he could charge for his remedies, which was beginning to make a fine living free of debt. His renown grew, and he opened an office in Medford, New Jersey, near Colemantown. He wrote a memoir called Early Recollections and Life of Dr. James Still, 1812 to 1885. His oldest son, James Thomas Still, was the first Black graduate of the Harvard Medical School, graduating with honors. Brothers. We know more about the remarkable Still family. James' brother, William Still, resided over the border in Philadelphia. Born a free man in New Jersey and the youngest of the Still children, William became a member of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society and director of the General Vigilance Committee of Philadelphia, where he managed the committee's finances and established a network of safe houses and contacts from the Upper South all the way to Canada, including working with Harriet Tubman. His savviness, intelligence, and courage in assisting over 800 freedom seekers was so widely known that in his 1902 New York Times obituary, he is referred to as the father of the Underground Railroad. One of his great contributions was the authorship of his book, William Still's Underground Railroad, which narrated interviews he conducted with enslaved people as they made their way north. Writing down their stories was an act of great daring-do, as it could lead to personal retribution from the authorities, and if found, would reveal the names and dates of runaways. William kept these records well hidden. His motive for writing the stories was to assist in family reunification, as many families had been separated either by the practice of slavery or independent dashes for freedom. Ironically, in one interview, William shockingly discovered that the person seeking assistance was none other than his own brother, Peter, who had been separated from the family in childhood and had been enslaved for over 40 years. Peter was now free and desperate to liberate his wife and family in Alabama. But when several attempts failed, he became famous by traveling the country, raising money at speaking events, and eventually was able to buy his family's freedom for $5,000. Now we circle back to place. The town of Colemantown, now called Mount Laurel, was ready to make history again. At historic Jacob's Chapel in the fall of 1970, then Mayor Bill Haynes told a crowd of 60 African Americans that Mount Laurel was denying their requests for affordable housing. "If you people can't afford to live in our town, then you'll just have to leave," the mayor told the stunned crowd. Galvanized, the residents filed a lawsuit. 5 years later, in 1975, New Jersey Supreme Court declared the township's exclusionary zoning practices were unconstitutional, and that every municipality has a responsibility to create fair housing policies for low and middle-income residents. The Mount Laurel decision was the first case of its type in the nation and is widely regarded as one of the most significant civil rights cases in the United States since Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. The Mount Laurel Doctrine today is a cornerstone of land use courses in all of our nation's law schools. Please visit our USR website to learn more about these historic sites and influential people. And now Kristen will show us where Colemantown Mount Laurel is on our map.
Hello. I am showing you my phone today because I'll tell you afterwards. Here is New Jersey, just thank goodness for technology. I'm going to zero in down here, and I have our marker. Colemantown is here. There you go, in southern New Jersey. And if anyone knows where the map of New Jersey is, please let me know.
Thank you, Kristen. When we gather on Sundays, we take time to be with each other in quiet and in contemplation. One of the most important things we can do for each other in communities of care and faith is to witness to the wholeness of each other's lives. The laughter, the struggle, the pain and the sorrow, the grief and the challenge, the joy and celebration, the wonder and the happiness. We can be with each other as we honor the truth of our listening, the music beyond the noise. So please find a way to be as comfortable as possible in your space. And take a slow, deep breath. Focus on the air moving in and out of your body. And just be here, listening, opening your heart. Take a deep breath. Let your body relax. Let your mind become quiet. Can you hear the music in the beat of your heart? Can you hear the music in our shared breathing? Hear it in the thump, in the breath as it moves in and out, in and out. There is a rhythm, a music in our living. Listen and breathe slowly and deeply. This morning, we carry the ongoing worry about the political situation in our country. We continue to hope for a smooth transition of power that honors our values and our future. We long for a return to the common ground of kindness and community and truth. May we find ways to work toward a future of compassion. This morning, we hold anguish and fear about the COVID crisis continuing in this nation and around the globe. We long not only for a vaccine and for treatments, but also for the strength to stay vigilant the world over. We so desperately want to see each other, hug each other, hold each other's hands, laugh and sing together. But equally, we are committed to keeping each other safe, whatever it takes. May we find in our hearts wellsprings of patience for the hard days ahead. Take a deep breath. Keep listening for the music of life. It plays in spite of all the challenges. Today, as every day, we share in that music of life together, in the wholeness of all that is, and we take this time to be with one another. To those who know grief and loss this morning, we offer our solidarity. We all know heartbreak too well. To those who make this world better and brighter for each of us, we offer our gratitude. We all have cause to give thanks. We offer our patience to those who are angry, our tears to those in pain, our love to those who wonder in this moment if they are loved. And we affirm that, yes, love is theirs and it is ours. That love plays in the music and the words and the movements beneath and beyond and above. Breathe. Listen. And sing.
Please join in our hymn, Filled with Loving Kindness. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
May the world know the loving kindness that abides in all. So may it be. Our reading this morning is by the poet Maya Angelou, and it's titled A Brave and Startling Truth. We, this people on a small and lonely planet, traveling through casual space, past aloof stars, across the way of indifferent suns, to a destination where all signs tell us it is possible and imperative that we learn a brave and startling truth. And when we come to it, to the day of peacemaking, when we release our fingers from fists of hostility and allow the pure air to cool our palms, when we come to it, when the curtain falls on the minstrel show of hate and faces sooted with scorn are scrubbed clean, when battlefields and Colosseum no longer rake our unique and particular sons and daughters up with the bruised and bloody grass to lie in identical plots in foreign soil, when the rapacious storming of the churches and the screaming racket in the temples have ceased, when the pennants are waving gaily, when the banners of the world tremble stoutly in the good, clean breeze, when we come to it, when we let the rifles fall from our shoulders and children dress their dolls in flags of truce, when landmines of death have been removed and the aged can walk into evenings of peace, when religious ritual is not perfumed by the incense of burning flesh and childhood dreams are not kicked awake by nightmares of abuse, when we come to it, then we will confess that not the pyramids with their stones set in mysterious perfection, nor the gardens of Babylon hagging as eternal beauty in our collective memory, not the Grand Canyon kindled into delicious color by Western sunsets, nor the Danube flowing its blue soul into Europe, not the sacred peak of Mount Fuji stretching to the rising sun, neither Father Amazon nor Mother Mississippi, who, without favor, nurture all creatures in the depths and on the shores. These are not the only wonders of the world. When we come to it, we, this people, on this minuscule and kithless globe, who reach daily for the bomb, the blade, and the dagger, yet who petition in the dark for tokens of peace, we, this people, on this mote of matter, in whose mouths abide cankerous words which challenge our very existence, yet out of those same mouths come songs of such exquisite sweetness that the heart falters in its labor and the body is quieted into awe. We, this people, on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling life is sapped from the living, yet those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness that the haughty neck is happy to bow and the proud back is glad to bend. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we are neither devils nor divines when we come to it. We, this people on this wayward floating body created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely, without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible. We are the miraculous, the true wonder of this world. That is when, and only when, we come to it.
Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger. You may see a stranger across a crowded room, and somehow you know Once you have found her, never let her go. Once you have found her, never let her go.
Have you ever read Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who? It is, while not a favorite in my house, certainly popular. It's the story of an elephant named Horton who hears something. He hears a sound and he's not exactly sure where it came from, so he stops and he listens. And he realizes there's a small voice coming from a small speck of dust. He still isn't positive what's going on, but he knows it's something and he listens closer. It turns out that that small speck of dust houses an entire population of whos. They live in their tiny buildings in their tiny cities on this tiny dust. And Horton vows to protect them. He carefully holds the speck wrapped in his big elephant trunk. But all around the forest are animals who refuse to believe Horton. They bully him, they yell at him, they call him stupid for believing in this tiny population full of tiny beings. They call him an idiot for carrying the dust around to protect it. They steal the dust speck from him and they hide it in a field of clovers, and Horton spends hours upon hours searching for the speck of dust. He will not give up, he will not stop. Improbably, he finds it. He takes it back into his delicate elephant care. And then they attack him and they grab the dust and they're about to boil it. And Horton begs the little whos to shout as loud as they can. And the mayor of Whoville runs around finding all the people, asking even the littlest child to shout. And with all their voices as one, the whos manage to finally make themselves heard. And the animals in Horton's forest stop torturing him and vow to help protect the dust. Over and over through the story, Horton reaffirms his vow by repeating the phrase, "A person's a person, no matter how small." That belief steadies Horton even in the face of his tormentors. And eventually, those very tormentors echo that line, "A person's a person, no matter how small."
So there is a particular group of theologies that are lumped together for the purpose of study and analysis called liberation theology. Liberation theology is a family of theologies which holds that at the center, the practical aim of theology is the liberating of all of humanity from violence, oppression, and poverty. In these theologies, the divine mission of humanity is the liberation of all. So one branch of liberation theology has roots in the Catholic movements in Latin America. Another has roots in the socialist struggles of the turn of the century. And yet another in Black theology today. And so liberation theology pops up in places where people are oppressed and where the message of salvation is understood to have been brought to and through the poor, the struggling, the powerless. Well-known theologians in the tradition include Gustavo Gutierrez, James Cone, Karl Barth, Cornel West, and Dolores Williams. And while each of these theologians have different backgrounds, strategies, and traditions, what unites them is the insight that racism, misogyny, transmisogyny, poverty, oppression, all makes us all spiritually poor. The fundamental position here is that oppression harms everyone, even the oppressor, because it denies or disfigures the divine within each person. Liberation theology argues that it is outrageous to God and to the divine spark in humanity that the mass poverty of this country exists side by side with great opulence. These theologies are Christian, And these theologies argue that Jesus is found not in the triumphant march of American exceptionalism, but in the soup kitchens and the prisons, in the Black mothers' tears for the public execution of their children, and in the migrant families destroyed for seeking calories and warmth. Liberation theology teaches that Jesus came not to speak to the wealthy and to the powerful and to those whose voices are always heard, but that he came to give voice to the voiceless, to overturn the tables of the wealthy, and to bring a message of salvation and liberation to and through the meek, the poor, the hungry, the outsiders. Liberation theology takes hold in the hearts and minds of folks who have faced horrible conditions and treatment at the hands of other humans, and yet who do not lose faith and hope in humanity.
I was taught that liberation theology is a Christian way of interpreting scripture and Jesus's life, not to justify slavery or imperialism, but to inspire the exact opposite, collective liberation. Liberation theology takes the tool of the oppressor, Christianity, which so often came along with invasions and conquering and the destruction of indigenous civilizations, and reads in it the initial true message of freedom and justice and an expansive understanding of the human family. Often we think of theology as relating only to God because of that root Greek word theo, meaning God. But in fact, theology can be understood as a system of religious belief, experience, and practice. In other words, we can talk about a theology, a set of beliefs and practices that orient a person in the world without necessarily talking about God. There's a theology in Horton Hears a Who. My PKs, that's shorthand for pastors' kids, are learning young that everything has a theology at work behind it. In Horton, there's an obvious one. Horton believes absolutely that it is his work to protect those smaller than him, which is everything on land, at least, since he's an elephant. A person's a person, no matter how small. And we might interpret that more broadly, a person's a person, period. Horton lives by this belief. The book intimates that he was prepared to die for this belief. But there's more theology that we can see at work in this story. Horton stops and listens. It's the first thing he does. He listens for the sounds that others can't hear or won't hear. And when he hears something and he speaks to the who's, he doesn't let the threat of the who deniers thwart him. He stands by the truth and the fact of their existence, and he stands by his own conviction that protecting them is worth his time and effort. Horton teaches us to listen, to find the actual, real, factual truth, and to dedicate ourselves to it, no matter who lies or denies or obfuscates or tries to confuse things. There are facts in this life and there are beliefs, and standing by both matters. A fact, of course, being a proven truth, and a belief being, we might say, a conviction that cannot be disproved. A faithful religious belief is not something that is proven to be counterfactual. If there are counterfactual things, then it is not a belief, it's a lie.
So liberation theology speaks of God and Jesus, of sin and salvation. And earlier this week in a class at seminary, we were discussing Unitarian Universalists and our commitment to justice and liberation. And the question arose, why don't we have a liberation theology? For many of us, the stumbling block isn't the fundamental belief that oppression of any kind is an affront to everyone. I suspect that most of us would agree with that. We get caught up by words like Jesus, God, sin, salvation. Indeed, many of us have liberated ourselves from theologies that have wielded these words as weapons against us, against who we are in all of our diversity and questioning glory. But when you read works by James Cone that tells us that Jesus is Black, or that Jesus said that the poor will inherit the earth, that the poor will inherit the earth, not be one among many who inherits the earth. When we read liberation theology as coming through the person of Jesus, it can be hard for us to see our theological reflection there. Jesus, while important to many of us and even the center of some of our meaning making, is not a shared foundation for Unitarian Universalists, in spite of our long history that stretches back to early Christian theologians. It is true, though, that UUism can be traced back through long lines of Christian heretics who believed in rereading, reinterpreting, finding a truth that oppressors have tried to crush. And here in America, the notion of universal salvation that the Universalists came to in their reading of scriptures, that universal salvation was a prototype for liberation theologies. It was not a doctrine which simply alleviated the fear of eternal damnation. Universal salvation was a doctrine that fundamentally shifted the understanding of God and humanity. It called its adherents to turn this world's injustice into justice, to reflect the grace and love of a God that would never condemn a single soul to eternal hell. Universal salvation asked humanity to take greater responsibility for the liberation and freedom of the material conditions of all people. Universal salvation says that we cannot simply shrug at poverty or racism and say that God will punish the perpetrators and the complicit, the jailers and the millionaires, and that God will free the rest of us. No. Universal salvation says that it is our job to create a world where poverty does not exist, where racism does not exist, where trans exclusion does not exist. Universal salvation tells us that it is not enough that we ourselves are not racist if our society is built in and through racism. It is not enough that we are not Jeff Bezos when his employees are on the brink of madness and starvation because their hours are indefinite and their wages are definite. And those wages do not even support their family without government assistance. Liberation theology, as bound up in and taught through Christianity, may not resonate deeply with us, UUs. But the liberation theology of universal salvation calls from our theological history and demands that we recognize that the entire Unitarian Universalist project is founded on one hope and one truth. The truth is that humanity is not free so long as it is chained to the injustices it perpetuates, and the hope is that these chains can be broken.
Humanity is not free so long as it is chained to the injustices it perpetuates, and these chains can be broken. That is the truth and the belief that we inherit. If we listen, we can hear the call in our own ancestors' voices. I have thought often in the last months about what they might have said about this moment we find ourselves in. What would Hosea Ballou have said, the preacher who absolutely believed that love suffused all existence? What would Theodore Parker have said, the preacher who understood his own call was to preach liberation and abolition with a gun on his pulpit because he knew he risked his life? What would these ancestors of ours say about this moment in American history in which fact is treated fast and loose, as though there were no difference between opinion and truth? What would they say to the divisions among us? What would they say about the greed and the racism and the oppression? What would they say to the lies and propaganda, to the religious self-righteousness that declares some sinners and others saved? They would preach their liberation in theology. They would say to me and to you that all people are made in the image of the holy, that all carry the spark of the divine, that oppression harms us all by means material and physical or spiritual and internal. They would tell us that humanity will never be free until all are free, that until we can build a world that reflects the divine in each of us, we will never experience the joy of beloved liberation. And they would tell us that it is possible, it is absolutely possible to change this world. Theodore Parker is the source of that quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." They knew that truth. They knew that we humans perpetuate injustice, and they believed, and they learned from their consideration of history and scripture and personal experience. They believed that the chains could be broken through action and love and compassion, broken by those of us who want to see a world in which all are free. And so they would tell us that we can listen for truths, abiding truths beneath and beyond all the noise of childish politicians and overblown celebrities and self-promoting billionaires, and that we can build a new world, making for all people a better and brighter future filled with love, a shared future, because none of us exists apart from the whole. They would shout a hopeful liberation theology from their pulpits and from the rooftops, even as they listened, really listened.
We find ourselves in this moment because we have allowed oppression and prejudice to thrive. Whether through complacency or active cultivation, we have allowed social ills to spread and grow. And we know that we cannot conquer social ills using individual means. Universal salvation means that we must all create communities which are accountable to each other and to the least of us, to the most marginalized. We as UUs are not called to just tidy up our own moral conscience, but to build communities to overcome communal injustices. Theodore Parker tells us that humans never fall so low that they can see nothing higher than themselves. This message is at once an admonishment and a hope. We are sorely tempted to see nothing higher than ourselves, to place ourselves at the top, and yet in truth, we never fall so low as to make that possible. Always we can hold the truth of our power and our smallness in our hands. Our reading reminds us of this. Maya Angelou beautifully speaks to our smallness. Even in all our grandiose thinking about our nations and wars and power and money, we are nothing but a blink in the eye of the universe. We are called to remember this every day, to not sink so low that we think that there is nothing above us, to not think so highly of ourselves that we don't hear the cries of the who's on the tiny speck. We must understand ourselves as part of a long line of history. We must live deeply into our connections, into the truth of human living, and into the beliefs that bind us.
Yesterday, a friend shared a nugget of Jewish wisdom. There's a story that tells that Reb Simcha Bunim carried in each pocket a slip of paper. On one was the line, "For my sake the world was created," and on the other, "I am but dust and ashes." We have to hold those truths together. And with them alive in us, we have to build our world together. The title of today's service promised a visioning for what comes next. The reality is that what comes next is entirely up to us. As Maya Angelou writes, we are the possibilities. What happens down this road, that's for us to decide. Months ago, I remember saying to you all that I didn't want to go back to normal. I wanted to go back to something better. And I stand by that now in the wake of the election and as I imagine what might be built when the pandemic eventually ends. Normal wasn't cutting it, not by a long shot. Normal meant families torn apart, women's bodies treated as objects, trans folks harmed, Black men murdered, and so much more. The normal we had grown accustomed to was no good. We have to take advantage of this moment in which we have no choice but to slow down, and we have to start listening. That's a starting point of our shared UU theology, listening to each other, because each voice matters. Listening for the truths, for the sounds we haven't been hearing. And we have to listen not only to the voices of the past and the voices on the small speck, but also, as difficult as it may be, to the voices of those who have been led astray by their own wrong beliefs or by the manipulations and propaganda of others. We have to listen because all of these sounds matter. They're all part of the music that plays. And then we have to draw clear boundaries around what is fact and what is a lie. We have to recreate that common ground at least. And then we have to stand by our beliefs that the holy moves in all things and that love weaves through existence. With the truth and our faith in hand, we have to stand on our Unitarian Universalist theology that declares that the fundamental mission of humanity is to create a world in which all are liberated, loved, and allowed to flourish in their inherent glory and wholeness. Ours is a liberation theology, one born in and created through community. Horton can't protect the speck alone. The whole forest has to come along. The road ahead might look different for each of us. You might consider if the career path you are on allows you to live your values, and you might make a change. You might consider if the way you invest and use your wealth is consistent with your beliefs, and you might make a change. You might consider if the way you spend your time is furthering liberation or contributing to oppression, and you might make a change. I don't know what it will be for each of us, but we're here to listen to each other and to work together as we navigate our individual and collective roles in the revolution for collective liberation. The road ahead is uncertain, but if we retain a deep understanding of both our greatness and our smallness, if we retain a deep understanding of the need to listen, and if we keep hold of our inherited liberation theology that must animate all our living, we can build something amazing.
Every Sunday that we gather, we ask for an offering to support the work of this congregation. Our mission here at USR is to grow in mind and spirit, to act with love for justice, and to transform ourselves and the world. And this work never stops, and it is work that must be supported by our time, our talents, and our material support. Thank you for being a part of this community and bringing your open hearts and open minds, along with your helping hands and your generous offerings. You make this community what it is, and you ensure that work of this congregation can continue for generations to come. On your screen, you will see the instructions on how to give. Every contribution helps us create a more welcoming and better world for all. Please give generously. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Don't you know, they're talking about a revolution, it sounds like a whisper. Don't you know, they're talking about a revolution, it sounds like a whisper. While they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know, talking about a revolution, it sounds like a whisper. Poor people gonna rise up and get their share. Poor people gonna rise up and take what's theirs. Don't you know you better run, 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 run. said you better run, 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 run. As finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh, while they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know, talking about a revolution, it sounds like a whisper. And finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh, talking about a revolution. Oh.
Please join us as we close our service with a responsive reading. It's the words of Abraham Lincoln. You can follow along with the slides. You can choose either part to read along with. As labor is the common burden of our race, so the effort of some to shift their share of the burden onto the shoulders of others is the great durable curse of the race. Olas, will you read the italics part?
As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master.
This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this to the extent of the difference is no democracy.
Our reliance is in our love for liberty. Our defense is in the spirit which prizes liberty as the heritage of all people in all lands everywhere.
Destroy this spirit, and we have planted the seeds of despotism at our own doors.
Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves and cannot long retain it.
Why should there not be a patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people? Is there any better or equal hope in the world?
Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it.
With truth and love as our guides, with faith in our shared beliefs and visions, listening for the whispers, holding on to hope, may we step out onto the road ahead and work for a better world. So may it be.
Please join in our closing hymn, We'll Build a Land. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised God may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Please join us in the words for extinguishing the chalice. They can be found on your screen. We extinguish the flame, but may the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the energy of action burn bright in our hearts until we are together again.